Alright, this is part 2 of the Till We Have Faces podcast by Ann Fields, Jenna Minnelli, and Megan Sproul. Alright, so we can just start how we did last time. We can just summarize what happened. So, there's a decent amount of things that happened, important-wise. We started where we left off was Psyche had not yet been taken to the mountain, but where we started this time is that they're going through the whole ceremony of it, and they really made like a sport out of it, kind of. It was a big like feast, and the priest came, and he's all like, okay, well, you're gonna dress up like all the girls that we have. So they pretty much made her look nothing like she really does look. So it reminded me of the Hunger Games. Yeah, I like that. It was good. It was yeah, in that way, kind of like dressing you up, make you look nice, put on a nice face for the crowd before you kind of go to your death, which is essentially what happened. We figured out later that they said that she was kind of drugged in a little bit, that she didn't really know what was going on. So basically they just had her sit on this big kind of chair things that carry her up to the mountain. They painted her face, made her look like the girls that lived in on Git's house, and that's all that Auril knew at that point, because she didn't go up to the mountain with her. She fell very, very ill. Yeah, she was not able to walk up the 6 hours that it took to get up to the mountain. Yeah,
so she stayed home. And then Auril decided that she was going to go up and find Psyche's bones so that they could burn them and give her a proper burial. But when she got up there, Psyche wasn't anywhere to be found. She kept looking and eventually saw her standing across a stream. And it turned out that Psyche had been taken in by the god of the mountain and was living in a palace, but Auril couldn't see the palace.
Yeah, and she has this huge, it goes on for 10 pages, it's just explaining background and everything that had happened. That's kind of the part where she said that she had been drugged at that point. Essentially, what really freaks Auril out, other than the fact that she can't see the palace that she takes her to and says, this is my home, but also the fact that she says that the god that she had been married to, her husband, the god of the mountain, only comes to her at night and refuses to let her see him. This could be some not even a human-like figure that Auril's really afraid that it's kind of like a monster that she's practically laying with at night. So she's trying to tell her, like, no, you're crazy, you need to come home, and she won't listen.
And just a quick note, this is where I really started seeing, we mentioned last time that it was based off Greek mythology, and this is a Greek myth. I remember learning about it before. Like, this is where I really started to see the comparison between what happened in the Greek mythology and what's happening now. It really was very clear with that whole part about only being able to be with the god in the dark.
So, and like you had said, Auril did not believe Psyche at all, but earlier in the morning, she actually did end up seeing the palace for like a split second. So then she started to believe Psyche and wonder what the heck was going on. Right, and I think part of that made her more nervous. Yeah, because not only, maybe just the idea that Psyche was going insane made her feel a little bit better about the god of the mountain, that, oh, maybe she's making it up, but just the fact that she saw it that split second, she's like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. And the they that we've been referring to is Bardia, because Bardia was the guard of the palace. He actually took her up to the mountain, Auril up to the mountain to get the burial remains.
And he's been training Auril how to use a sword, which I don't know if it's going to be important or not, but I feel like it's probably going to be important.
I think it gives her kind of a headstrong demeanor a little bit, because she's talking about how, like, oh, well, I'll go and I'll kill the god myself. Yeah. So I think, I'm not sure if she hadn't been training, if she would be that confident in herself.
So I think that's pretty much where we are, because we ended when Auril is heading back to the palace. Did you want to do the rhetorical analysis of the 10-page speech that Psyche gives about the palace?
Sure, we can do that. For me, I was trying to pin down like one specific part, and I couldn't really find it because I thought all of it was kind of important. A little bit what we talked about last podcast was that since Auril is the narrator, the only thing that she's going to know about what happened on the mountain is from word of mouth, and so this whole entire speech was word of mouth, and feel pretty important to the story as a whole. I think that you're looking at the first thing that's important to mention about her speech, bride of the god or whatever they said. They bathed her, they gave her new clothes, all of which Auril couldn't see. She thought that Psyche was still in rags when she had seen her. So they bathed her, they gave her new clothes, they gave her a feast, so she was well fed, and she thought it was the most beautiful palace ever. She loved it.
So I feel like this might be a good paragraph to focus on to do the rhetorical analysis. The weather, of course. I couldn't see it tied to the way I was, but I could feel it. I was suddenly cool. Then I knew the sky must be filling with clouds behind my back, overblown, for all the colors on the mountain went out and my shadow vanished. And then that was the first sweet moment. A sigh of wind, west wind, came at my back. Then more and more wind. You could hear and smell and feel the rain drawing near. So then I knew quite well the gods really are, and that I was bringing the rain. And then the wind was roaring, but it's too soft a sound to call it a roar, all around me, and rain. And the tree kept some of it off me. I was holding out my hands all the time and licking the rain off them. I was thirsty. The wind got wilder and wilder. It seemed to be lifting me off the ground, so that if I hadn't been for the iron round my waist, I'd have flown right away, up in the air, and then, at last, for a moment, I saw him.
Rhetorically, the part that Megan had just read, as well as like the whole entire speech that she gave, is very vivid and very descriptive, which does kind of lead to how traumatic of an experience this was for her, because typically the things that we remember in life impacted us a lot. So that's one thing, and that leads to the speech of itself, as well as her tone, that she's very honest when she talks about her feelings, but she's also very happy and hopeful, which kind of leads to Auril thinking that she's insane, because why is she, so joyful when she's talking about all this stuff?
Psyche really, really wants to tell this story to Auril because she thinks it's such a great story, and she wants to let her sister know what happened because she can see that Auril is worried. And she just wants to relay the fact that it's okay now and that she is okay.
Yeah, and I think when you go to the appeals of this, ethos is the most muddy of them all, because you want to say, because of her description, she has authority, because people don't just make up stuff like that off the fly with that much description, but at the same time, she's not the narrator, and the narrator, the person we're supposed to believe is the most reliable in this whole story, believes her to be insane. So it's really relative ethos, I want to call it, that from one standpoint, yes, Psyche does have a lot of authority because this is her story, this is what she went through, but at the same time, we don't know 100% if that's true. From the speech alone, because of the fact that Auril is the narrator, but later we start to see that she does have a little bit more ethos, especially when Auril sees the palace for the first time and realizes that her story is real.
There was a ton of pathos in her whole speech, like we had said earlier with a lot of the description, but there wasn't a lot of logos, because it wasn't, it was logical in a way, because it was from Psyche's point of view, and she was telling the story, but it's kind of like a story that Auril does not believe, so it does not seem logical to Auril.
Yeah, it's like the same thing with ethos, that it depends on perspective, based off of your, how you ascertain who has the logos. If you're just going off the speech alone, it has a lot of logical sense because, these are the parts that she had already seen in the mountain, like people, when Auril went up the mountain, she saw that was a tree. Those were, she found something of Psyche's, I don't remember what it was,
It was a ruby from her shoe.
Okay, so there was that. So she knew logically Psyche had been here. So Psyche had seen this place, and she was listing off places in her speech that Auril had also seen.
And even the more fantastical parts of her speeches, it wasn't hard for Bardia to believe when Auril told Bardia, because that's what he believed. He believed in, like, the gods and stuff. So it really also just depends on who you trust as the reader to give you the right information.
Right. And I think also Auril finds this hard to believe. I think mostly because the fox, who is her teacher, has told her all of, like, the Greek standpoints, so she's very hesitant to believe in her own religion.
Right.
And I think that kind of hinders her belief of what Psyche says.
And she also, it was something that, I don't remember if it was in this part or the last part that we had read, she asked him, like, do you believe in the gods and stuff like that, and he just flat out said no. And so for her, hearing about this stuff, this has been her teacher for a very long time. She's very close to him. She calls him grandfather. They have a kind of a paternal and daughter relationship. So she's going to believe him before anyone, and so that's kind of where her disbelief comes in. I think also a part that I really liked out of Psyche's whole speech that contributed to her pathos was the part that she said, I felt ashamed in his presence, when she's talking about being with both of the gods, the god of the west wind and then the god of the mountain, and she just said, I felt human, and Auril did not understand her because, like, oh, you're so beautiful, you don't, she doesn't understand, but Psyche was trying to explain to her as best as she could that when you're a human, when you're immortal in the presence of a god, that kind of makes you feel insecure about yourself. And so for me, going on to the next part of the book, I would be very curious to see what exactly the god of the mountain kind of saw in her, because if she is mortal and she feels kind of embarrassed about herself, like, what makes her worthy in a way, because she doesn't seem to believe it herself.
And I think that connects with our daily lives too, because, I mean, we don't always see the beauty in ourselves. So, and I think it's a very good connection that C.S. Lewis made from the real, actual world and the fictional world that he wrote in this book. So,
yeah, having relatable characters with relatable traits contributes to ethos and that part. So we do definitely relate to Psyche in this speech, especially with the description that she gave, with the emotions that she was feeling. They're very human, and I think that's especially what she wanted to hit on with that part when she was telling Auril, like, I felt ashamed that she is a human, and throughout this entire speech you see that, she's very human. What she's feeling is very human. So again, like, will she progressively throughout the book kind of get more detached and divine? Is that something that we're going to see through her speeches and how she talks, or is she going to keep that mortal side of herself?
Well, one of the questions is how the narrator feels about the other characters and what the signals the narrator gives to show that feeling. And I feel like this is a good section to kind of talk about that with, because of how much Psyche and Auril interact and how much we see them talking to each other, and so we kind of begin to understand their relationship. So obviously Auril loves Psyche almost like a daughter because she raised her almost like a daughter, even though they're somewhat close in age. Auril helps Psyche take her first steps and everything, and she even mentions that when, like, Bardia's like, aren't you scared? And she's like, no, I mean, I raised Psyche, I taught her how to talk. So I think that really is an important part of their relationship.
Their interactions in this part of the book that we read especially was a turn. It was very different than what they had before. In the first part, you saw, like, the motherly-daughter relationship and how close they were. And in this section, she was very kind of aggressive with Psyche, trying to get her to see her point of view. Like, she was kind of selfish in a way in this section, which you know, being humans ourselves and having relationships with other people and having people that we love in our life, we can kind of see where she's coming from, that if we believe someone that we care about is doing something that we think to be dangerous and they just completely will blow it off, we will do everything in our power to get them to see our point of view, because we are very opinionated people, and Oral, in the same way, did just that. She stopped trying to be the motherly, I'm going to reason with you, and literally was getting very physical with her. She was grabbing her, she was pulling her, she was saying, you're going to come back with me if I have to drag you. Mm-hmm. So it was very different from the relationships that we had seen before, which I thought was very interesting. And Psyche was almost scared of her, because she, like, it even says in the part that we read that Psyche was so astonished that Orwell didn't see any of this and that she was being so aggressive of her. Like, it sounded like she was actually scared of Orwell.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, I don't think that discredits their relationship, though. I still think Orwell looks after Psyche as a mother/sister type thing, because, and what she's doing is what she thinks is best for Psyche, which may not come across as what's best for her, but it doesn't discredit their relationship at all, even though on the surface it might look like it does.
And then it comes to another question that we've all heard, that people do crazy things for love. So I think, if anything, like Megan was saying, this part shows how close their relationship is, because of how desperately Oral wants to get Psyche to come back home. And going further on in the book, I'm wondering if we're going to see that intensified, kind of in a way. Like, will Oral do something so dangerous or bad just to get Psyche to come back home? Especially, we know from reading at the very beginning, she's writing these things down in a book with fear. She knows that she's going to make the gods angry. So what exactly did she do to make them angry? Like, we don't see that yet. At least I don't see that yet. I mean, something that we could end on is, are you familiar with this myth, and how does this interpretation relate to the actual myth that was written down? I'm very familiar with the myth too, and it's, what I can see so far, it's pretty dead on, yeah.
Pretty dead on, because in the myth, it's about a person who marries someone who they cannot see except at night because he doesn't want to be seen. So it's pretty dead on in that aspect, and I'm interested to see if in the future it stays the same, because in the future, when she finally does see who she's married to, stuff happens, and I won't say anything because I don't want to spoil it, but I'd be interested to see if it's going to turn out the same.
I will admit that I wasn't very familiar with this myth, but I did look it up as soon as I knew that we were reading this book. And some things that I have found different, they're minute, but I'm wondering if they're intentional for a reason as we go on with the book. One of the things that I had noticed upon looking up the myth is that all three of the sisters, Redival, Oral, and Psyche, were actual birth sisters, and Psyche was not the half-sister. So I don't know if it's just something that C.S. Lewis decided to do because he wanted to establish the fact that, the god would choose Psyche because she's of another parent, that she's more beautiful because of the fact that she's not exactly their sister, and maybe the fact that, he doesn't have to explain why Redival and Oral aren't so beautiful because he wanted Psyche to be. Another thing that I did notice was that in the original myth, the Ungit or Aphrodite actually had her son go kill Psyche, was what she had ordered, because she was jealous of her beauty. Instead of the whole Oemia sacrifice her to save the town, it was the god of the mountain who was given the task to kill Psyche, and instead of killing her, he shot himself with his own arrow and fell in love with her. Soul Cupid kind of thing. So again, that makes me wonder a little bit, why did he specifically pick the kind of sacrificial
type instead of going with, you know, the God of the Mountain. And I can kind of see it a little bit because of the narrator that he picks, but of course, if that would have happened to the whole, you know, God of the Mountain shooting himself with the arrow, falling in love with Psyche, we wouldn't know it to begin with because it would have been from Psyche's point of view. And since Auril is the narrator, we don't know. But
I guess technically we don't. That may have happened. We really don't know how, because of the limits of our narrator.
I mean, from narration standpoint, with Auril, we know that she's going to have more interactions with Psyche as we move further on. So, you know, will she do what she threatened to do? Will she go and attempt to kill the God of the Mountain herself? Will she let Psyche just be at the mountain, or is she gonna, you know, at the part that we ended today, she's going back down to the palace. Is she gonna tell everyone about it, and is she gonna like get an army to come up there? Like, how far will she go to bring Psyche back? Yeah. So until next time, look for part 3.